Senator Jim Molan is a Liberal Senator for New South Wales and he's up for re-election this election. How are you going, Jim?
I'm going well, Ricky. Going well, thank you.
Now, we're seeing quite some brinkmanship continuing regarding Russia and Ukraine, but very concerning comments that the nuclear war topic has been raised. In your experience, is this just brinkmanship or is it a real risk?
And I think that's the billion-dollar question, Ricky, because none of us really know the answer to that. And because none of us can say, oh, no, this is just brinkmanship, he won't do it, people assess President Putin as not being a rational actor, a rational person in relation to this situation. It was not rational for him to invade Ukraine, and for his army, it was not rational for him to invade Ukraine with a military that was not up to the job. So I think that is the big question. The fact of the matter is he could do it. He could do it with nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, as we call them, at any time now, and that's what you've got to prepare for. I would be quite sure that NATO would have plans to prepare for it, and I'm quite sure that Russia would know those plans, and hopefully that deters them to some extent from using those kind of weapons.
It's a controversial topic, I know, but if I can put it this way, we went into the Iraq war on less intelligence than what we know about Russia right now.
You're probably right, although I'd suggest that certainly the Americans and NATO, the level of intelligence that they would have on Russia would be mind-boggling. And I get a feed out each day of the intelligence flights that are conducted through the Black Sea and over the eastern edge of NATO, over the countries that run down the eastern edge of NATO, and you can see why they're being flown in that area. We know what their reach is, and so the kind of tactical level intelligence of where big hunks of metal called tanks are and things like that would be pretty good. What did surprise us, though, Ricky, was not the kind of number of troops and ships and planes and tanks, etc., but the competence. I think everyone assumed that if Russia decided to bowl over Ukraine, it would do it. And what's the greatest failure in this, the intelligence failure, and you always have intelligence failures because intelligence is just, the view of someone else, and hopefully that someone else is pretty well plugged in. But the greatest intelligence failure there was the assumption that Russia was 10 times, 100 times more capable of doing what it wanted to do than it turned out that it was. So I think that's the intelligence failure so far.
Well, what we know on the public record, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has said we shouldn't wait for the moment when Russia decides to use nuclear weapons. We must prepare for that. And I think there was one academic suggesting that Russia could actually bring a sort of Hiroshima-style ending to the war in Ukraine. I mean, is this all just sort of bluster, or how do we get to the bottom of exactly whether this might happen rather than find out after the fact?
Well, I don't think you can get to the bottom of it with any degree of definition. And I think therein lies the problem. So what I would suspect, and I've worked in American headquarters at war in the past, and I've run American forces as chief of operations in Iraq, 150,000 Americans. What they would have done, they would have contingencies prepared for just about every eventuality. Your listeners may not be aware, but there are at least, to my knowledge, 5 aircraft carriers which are in various seas, the Med, the Arctic, various places that can launch their aircraft into Ukraine and into Russia. And I would suspect that I would suspect that the Russians know absolutely everything about that. I would suspect that there would be hundreds and hundreds of NATO aircraft which are primed and ready to go if the Russians do use weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological or nuclear weapons.
So you're talking about an interception scenario if something
does
go down?
No, not an interception. I don't think they're capable of intercepting a tactical nuclear weapon fired by a missile out of Russia into, for example, Kiev. I don't think I think the distances and the times are far, far too short. I mean, they're putting those weapons in almost every day into various parts of Ukraine, and I just don't think that stopping it. But should it happen, should a tactical nuclear weapon be used within Ukraine, then I think that those aircraft, that I would like to think, I should put it that way, Ricky, I would like to think that there will be an instant, immediate and violent reaction from NATO, which would be conventional in nature. It would be a conventional attack on every Russian concentration by aircraft, as I said, using conventional weapons, and by submarine-launched cruise missiles, by hundreds and hundreds of cruise missiles from all around Europe, from submarines, etc. And I suspect that Russia has been told in great detail about that, and that is what is keeping Russia on the straight and narrow.
Now, you mentioned those sorts of military responses. There's been some commentary during the domestic election campaign here about expelling diplomats and other sanctions against Russia, but is it more so those militaristic retaliation threats that are the more compelling for Russia than the diplomatic?
I think you've got to do both, and that they're both used in different areas. You know, what strikes me about this Ukraine war is that it's just the basic importance of people loving their country enough to stand up to a threat like this. Because if Ukraine had fallen over in 3 or 4 days, as most people expected it, Ricky, to do, when they went for their decapitation attempt, that is to take out the government, install a new government, and then run the Ukraine on that basis. If that had happened in 3 or 4 days, diplomacy or sanctions or military operations would have been irrelevant because it would have all been over. And I guess the point that I'm making is that diplomacy is very, very good, very, very important. In Australia's case, diplomacy is our first line of defence. That is our alliances, our ability to know what's going on, our ability to talk to allies and to have allies. But you've got to have both. You've got to have a realistic, hard edge behind the diplomacy, so that if you make a threat, then the threat has got to be credible.
Now, it'd be derelict of me not to ask, while we're talking about national security matters, about China and the discussion about the Solomon Islands situation. What's your take on how active China is in the Solomon Islands at this point in time?
Oh, it is frighteningly active, and it has been active for some considerable period of time, for a couple of years. It has just about every variation in very, very small numbers of the Chinese military there, supposedly training the Solomon Islands police, etc., maintaining security, doing what was there from the unrest that we had in November of last year, plus the bigger unrest that I was initially involved in back in early 2000s that led to Ramsey. So
you better explain a bit of context there when you say you were involved in the unrest to clear that one up.
I commanded the Australian forces that went in to rescue, to evacuate the Australian citizens, about 1,100 of them, from the Solomon Islands when there was the issue between the Malaitans and the Guadalcanal people, and then we then stepped back and waited to see what would happen. And our foreign minister at the time, Mr. Downer, then decided that we would put in Ramsey. Now, Ramsey stands for, let me see if I can get it, Regional Assistance Mission Solomon Islands. And it was a mission headed by diplomats, because we're not at war. It was a mission headed by diplomats with a big block of Australian Federal Police and other police volunteers from around the country, and a military component as well. We spent years over there, and it cost us over $1 billion to do that, to restore security. Now, you wouldn't get much thanks from Prime Minister Sogavare out of that, because we are not his favourite nation in the world. And I think that explains a lot of what's going on. So that's how I see it. There is nothing much, I think, that can be done at the moment, except through continuing our diplomacy, which is critically important, particularly in the Pacific Forum, making sure that our other allies, such as the US and New Zealand, stayed plugged in. And then what we have got to do is make sure that our military, our financial, our economic strength is maintained just in case we wake up one day and something very bad has happened over there.
Well, I guess lastly on that front, the Coalition, what's the policy regarding overall defence spending, say as a percentage of GDP, and are we seeing a matching commitment from Labor during this election?
Well, we always see a matching commitment from Labor, but my view is that after the experience we had of when Labor was last given the control of military spending, was that you can't trust them on this. Our policy is that we will maintain 2% as a floor. We're about 2.1%. There's a bit of contention about that. But the fact of the matter is that we are at record high levels of spending. I just wish we'd started 25 years ago. I wish we'd started 10 years ago. And I look back to the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, and I think every time I'm criticised by a Labor member, I think back, and I often say, that it might have helped if they had done anything in the 6 years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd governments, where they cut defence spending brutally, and all of the cuts came out of future capability, that is, weapon systems we were going to buy in the future, and we're still suffering from this. They didn't, for example, Ricky, didn't build one single ship. They didn't lay down one single ship. They didn't start one single ship. We've done 70 since that time. Now, that's an astounding figure. We're putting $270 billion extra dollars into defence, and I think it comes to $540 billion within the next 10 years. Now, that's a lot of money for defence. A lot of money for defence. I happen to believe that we need to put in more, and I will make that representation internally to government. And the Prime Minister says, well, 2% is a base. It's not a ceiling. It's a floor and not a ceiling.
So to be clear, you're saying what that floor is, you would like to see the Coalition spending more than what it's currently committed to?
Oh, I certainly would. And I think most of us would. At the moment, having looked at all the issues such as that use money. I mean, we put, if I remember the figures rightly, we put something like $331 billion into COVID, into support payments for COVID. Now, I totally support that, because in the idea of national security, then having people with jobs that understands that their country and their government looks after them in times of extraordinary situation, that's a fabulous contribution to the national security of this country. And as the Prime Minister said during his Anzac Day address, he said, it takes a nation to defend a nation. That was the theme of his Anzac Day address. It takes a nation to defend a nation. So defence or national security is not something you can say, oh, Defence Force can do that. Throw them a few bucks and let them get on with it. Each and every one of us, not necessarily in a military sense or whatever, but every single one of us can make a contribution to national security. But I tell you, Ricky, the greatest contribution we can make is to vote for stability in government on the 21st of May, and the only way you'll get that is by voting for the coalition government, who will maintain economic stability and national security stability.
Well, Senator Jim Molan, we wanted to access your wealth of experience in these matters. Thanks very much for sharing that with us today here on Flow.
Thanks, Ricky. Very happy to speak. Thank you.